With the launch of the Planet Zoo America's Animal Pack, I've been back in the game to create some brand new habitats for the latest species. As with every new pack, I have pulled together a set of starter habitats, and these are a set of basic enclosures that meet all of the animals' requirements. That means for those, I've only used unthemed scenery, so the habitats are fully functional out of the box. There's no unlocking, and no DLC or research needed to use them. That said, after creating probably 200 starter habitats by this point, it's getting a little samey. Honestly, I'm starting to run out of ideas to make them unique and different. So for this pack, I've added a twist. Alongside the starter habitats, I've also created a second set of more detailed habitats. These ignore the usual limitations, so some aren't 100% optimised for the animals, and I have used some themed and DLC scenery pieces for them. So whilst I've still got the starter enclosure for the traditionalists, breaking the basic starter formula to create some additional detailed, and I guess fancier habitats, this has enabled me to explore some new design ideas, and it's kind of reignited a little creative inspiration. Here's what I've come up with. The starter American Flamingo habitat, this is mostly a copy of the revamped Greater Flamingo habitat I released last year. It's a big enclosure, you can get around 500 birds in here and still meet their space requirements. Had a new lick of paint on the hard shelter to brighten it up a bit, and I've also raised the barrier a little because I was getting complaints that the animals were escaping from the Greater Flamingo version. I think that's to do with the height difference in the different biomes rather than I created the habitat wrong, but I know it can be fiddly for some, so just raise the barrier up and that should prevent any escapes now. Aside from those few tweaks, this is pretty much the same version as the other flamingo starter habitat. The new detailed habitat for the flamingos, I've designed this to fit with the more subtropical wetlands, so more like the Everglades. It's a bit more rustic and there's a lot more plants. There's an enrichment feeder hidden beneath the rocks in the centre, and I've been itching to create one of these for a while, but you need to use the faux rocks for the right effect, and that's a DLC, so that's a no-go for the starters. Little smaller, this version can only fit about 20 flamingos, and there's way too many plants in here. They do not like that, so it's more of a use this one with the welfare turned off, or deal with them complaining about there being too much vegetation. Bighorn sheep starter habitat, pretty empty inside, hence why I've got a partially buried hard shelter. The bighorns don't have hard shelter requirements, but it helps make the habitat look a bit more interesting with that in there. Also created a brand new custom barrier out of the wood beams. Still, it's getting a bit samey with these. There's only so much you can do with the painted wood beams. The detailed habitat I've created for the bighorns. The habitat shell is a redesigned version of my alpine ibex habitat that I developed for the Every Animal Zoo. No hard shelter in this version, it's not needed. More space here means there's more flexibility with the rocks and the planting, and recolouring the faux rocks for this one just works so much better than relying on the desert rocks for the starter version. Like with the detailed flamingo habitat though, there's a little too much planting in here, and the sheep would be complaining about that if I had the welfare turned on. That said, I don't think it makes a big difference if you overplant for the welfare, so I'm not worrying about that in these detailed versions of the habitats. Anyway, moving on, starter bush dog habitat. Got a big hard shelter in here because I can't use any enrichment items, so no burrow allowed. Bush dogs also have a water requirement, so sort of a big pond at the front for this. There's also moderate planting, could have added a few more and they'd be fine with that, but that means having to make the enclosure larger since more plants means less navigable space for them. Detailed bush dog habitat, this is a redesign of a Tasmanian devil habitat I created for my Australia zoo. It's a really open enclosure and a step away from the big tall box approach I tend to go for with the starter versions. Love with this one, I've got a guest barrier that goes almost all the way around the whole enclosure, and that gives 360-degree views across the entire habitat. There's no wasted space. Nobody should be complaining that they've got a poor view of the bush dogs, unless they're all in the burrow, of course. The inside of the enclosure, I've dropped the terrain down so that you can get away with really short barrier up top. In terms of space inside, it's a little tight in here. It can accommodate about 6 bush dogs, which is about half the capacity of the starter version. There is also a bit less water in here than they want. And that's more about the way the animals navigate through water and the terrain than it is about the amount of water in here. There is enough water if they could navigate it all, but as soon as you start putting things like rocks in and plants, they decide that they can't, that's a no access area for them, so it kind of suffers from that a bit. So yeah, if you're using this in a challenge or a franchise zoo, then you're probably going to get a couple of complaints that they haven't got enough water. Anyway, similar to the Tasmanian devil habitat I created, it's still got the viewing dome in here. Don't use this very often because the entrance is a bit boxy for me. So I've done the best I can with that to try and alleviate how boxy it looks. Heavy decoration with a lot of the South American pieces here. Don't use these often enough and I love them. Next is the starter coyote habitat. Nice custom fence in this one. Coyotes do need quite a bit of space and I wanted to avoid this looking really empty, so there's an extension building tagged on at the back, and that's purely to accommodate for the size requirement. Use that tactic occasionally in some of my builds where the animals need a lot of space, but it starts looking really empty at the front if you do accommodate for their entirety of the space they want. The detailed version of the coyote enclosure, I've used the same habitat shell as I've used for the bighorn sheep, and I've gone to town here with the faux rocks. The coyotes cover a vast area in real life and there's multiple biomes you can use to situate them. But I do like the drier grassland bordering on desert approach, so thinking Southern California, getting into desert territory there, that's what I think of if I think of coyotes. Plenty of space in here for a full set of coyotes. Do have another extension tagged on at the back, but being able to use the faux rocks for this version, I can cover that up a little easier with the faux rock wall, which looks a lot better from the guest viewpoint. Managed to get the beaver pool enrichment working on top of the rocks here. The pools can be a bit fiddly to place, and you have to be careful what's clipping, otherwise it shows as inaccessible by the animals. Starter habitat for the greater rhea, let's face it, it's not great. This is purely functional and there's very little design gone into this aside from the custom barrier. Rheas need a lot of space and they don't tolerate plants well. Even if they did, there's very few plants available for the South American grassland and temperate biome, and that culminates in big habitats looking rather empty, which is what this is. For the more detailed version of the greater rhea habitat, again, this was a struggle to bring anything creative into this because whilst I'm not strictly sticking to the space and planting requirements for the detailed versions, I don't want to make something that's entirely unsuitable for the animals. So for this I've gone with a more farm design, used the barnyard pack fencing, and I've stepped up the terrain at the back to break up the space a little bit. The Australian rusted corrugated roof and the beams work well for this. That's meant for Australian farmland, but it works just as well for South American farmland too. Around the side of this habitat, I've got a lot of open space here for the rheas to roam free. Used circular shape for the barrier, so it's focusing on the big tree in the middle, and that helps a little bit with the style here. It was a struggle to make anything that looks stylish with this one, but I've done my best. Make a feature out of things like the trees. My Ocelot starter habitat is almost a direct copy of the revamped clouded leopard starter habitat I created last year. They have almost identical needs as the clouded leopard, even down to the tropical plants. So a really easy habitat to create this one, just switched up the colours a bit. I like to add a bit more colour with the South American animals for some reason. The more detailed Ocelot habitat, broken quite a few of the starter habitat rules with this one. The front is much more open, and if I had welfare turned on, the ocelots would likely be feeling a bit stressed up here. This is also a stepped up habitat, so the terrain at the back is much higher than at the front, and that really helps for staging this as a tropical habitat. That sort of design is an absolute no-go with the starter habitats because the habitat gate is elevated above ground level, and what I found when I did some of these for starter habitats, many players seem to struggle with the pathing for this type of design as opposed to the gate being at ground level, so I steer clear of that for starter habitats now. Also loads of unnecessary details in this habitat. I've got a waterfall in there. They don't need that, but I thought it'd be nice to put one in. There's also a small stream feeding away from this. Ocelots can swim, so they are enjoying having a little paddle in there, but again, they don't have a water need, so this isn't needed. It's just extra details. I've also used the temple pieces from the South America DLC. Have barely touched these temple pieces. I think I used it once in a llama habitat years ago, but I thought it'd be fun to add a ruined South American temple in here. Starter habitat for the white-faced saki is a modified version of the lemur starter habitat, but with the one-way glass barrier to ensure they don't get stressed. About half the size of the lemur version, the sakis really don't need a lot of space. You can comfortably fit the maximum of 12 in here, plus any babies they might have. More detailed version for the sakis, this is much smaller and accommodates about half of what the starter version can. I love the design. There's a sleeping area in the upper section, and that's a nice way for the sakis to get some peace and quiet because I've made this into a walkthrough habitat. As a shy animal, I'm sure with the welfare turned on that would create a heap of problems for them, so just making sure they've got some quiet spaces the guests can't path to. I do think out of all the detailed habitats I've created for this pack, this is my favourite. It's a brand new design, not created anything like this before, and it was fun to build again. Sometimes with the starters, I know what people expect from those, and it is kind of feeling like a chore sometimes just to get them out. So it's fun to take on the challenge of doing something different, and I'm finding that I'm really enjoying making the small habitats these days. So maybe I need a new series focusing on the small habitats. Anyway, that's all 12 enclosures I've created for the New Americas pack animals. They are on the workshop, the codes are in the description below. Let me know what you think, and of course, thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.